Malachite was having a peculiar day. There was an alien in front of her. In fairness, the day had begun with her sprouting a few tails, so the bar was starting high and holding strong. The thing, whatever it was, hovered some 10 feet away. It was big. She guessed it was around 7 feet tall standing, though it was hard to be sure in this squatted, levitating position. Its head, if it could be called that, was a sort of molten orb that floated above a vaguely humanoid body. Long, thin limbs draped from its shoulders tapered into points rather than hands. Its legs were the more startling feature. It sat in midair, and its spindly legs were clasped together at the taloned toes, forming a sort of mouth with the knee joints standing in for the corners of a smile. Barbs attached to the leg interiors held place of teeth. When its arms hung in front of it, the gaps between them and the body almost looked like eyes in negative. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere. "This one has gifts for you," it said. She could think of few prospects more worrying than that. Not that she was in a great position to refuse anything. She had no idea where or what she was. Some sort of fox thing in some sort of forest. "Kish it," the thing corrected her. She blinked. It was in her head, listening to her think. Her expression of bafflement must have been perceptible because it repeated its response. "Kish it said again. "The title chosen for your manifestation, Muse. There are others like you here. Other muses, and other Kishit as well. You may meet them some day. Muses seek muses as roots seek water." Images were entering her mind with the words themselves. As it spoke, it painted. She saw visions of other similarly shaped people, and others with shapes and aesthetics she'd not seen before. Each wasn't quite human, in much the same way she seemed to be now. The transformation hadn't happened long ago, but something about it already felt like home. Weirdly enough, spreading a couple tails and bright green blood felt like the least baffling of the events to slap her in the face today. She reflexively felt for her notepad at her hip before reminding herself it wasn't there. Neither were her pants, for that matter. Modesty might have been a concern if the entire situation was less surreal, but at the moment it was pretty far from her mind. She wanted to ask the thing what it was, where she was, what had happened. She could speak on some occasions with the right people, in the right spots, when her body allowed it, but she stuck primarily to sign or writing in situations she knew speech wouldn't come, and tended to think in it too. "This one speaks for Hesmodan," it volunteered. All at once Kite felt a twisting in her brain. A gentle but fully alien intrusion. She felt a shape appear, accompanied by emotion. In hands she could feel without seeing. The name expressed as gesture, not spelled but conveyed. It was followed by others. Kishik got a sign too, expressed as a form she could manually repeat with her hands. Muse had a sign already, both as a noun and a verb, but as the creature twisted it into her mind it carried a new definition that made her feel like a variation might be required. That was, admittedly, somewhat less pressing than the definition that accompanied it. "I'm made of paint?" This time, when she phrased it in her mind, she asked it as she would ask herself, by signing. "Medium," it corrected, providing yet another unique sign to express the associated idea. It was derived from the paint sign, but it incorporated elements of soul that suggested an ethereal quality held further from the body than normal, as though projected. She heard it spoken aloud as well. "A gift for you," it repeated in her mind. Kite blinked and looked back at it. Apprehension gave way to curiosity, and she cautiously reached out to accept it, though she could see nothing specific to accept. As she did so, she became suddenly aware of a new garment on her body. A warm, soft-colored aviation jacket had appeared on her from seemingly nowhere. Worn, tired, but in great condition. She knew this jacket. Her father had owned it. The patches were missing, but the smell was the same. It had gone down with him in the war. She'd never gotten it back. "How did you get this?" she signed physically this time. She scowled a little, to emphasize a degree of suspicion, and idly wondered how that conveyed with the new architecture of her face. She hadn't seen herself in a mirror yet, but was keenly aware she had a muzzle and rather prominent ears. They'd instinctively rotated backward, which was in itself delightful. Great big giant tools for additional clarity. "Gallery finds lost things," it replied in sign as well, but not in hands. It lacked those. With a sort of darting paint in the sky in front of it that seemed to animate into recognizable extractions of form. The ability for the colored light to move beyond general motions limited to fingers and arms gave it what felt like a more exaggerated quality. Color and size changed too, as it spoke, emphasizing certain signs over others. Whatever this substance was, it could add layers of additional texture to language her hands alone couldn't capture. "That's why you're here," it continued. "Feed it." She compared the words she heard with the signs she saw. They conveyed a concept of giving the jacket some of herself, the substance she was supposedly made of. There was another element involved, too, a sort of emotional giving, the idea of love expressed. Malachite reached for it, and brilliant green fluid emerged from her eyes, swirling through the air and finding its way into the leather. She could feel it snug around her in a way that made her gasp. A hug she hadn't felt since his deployment in '61. She slowly clasped her hands around herself, as though hugging back. This was the stuff the creature had signed with. Medium. She had it too, it seemed. It flowed rather freely when one was crying. Thank you, she signed at last. She had to hold her hand a little further away from her face than normal. Her mouth stuck out further than it used to. May it keep you warm, it replied, audibly this time. So it wasn't just mimicking the last thing she did, it was actively choosing different ways to speak. A new word entered her mind, as the first definitions had. Instrument. It didn't carry a specific meaning related to making music, more like a tool or object with specific functional purpose. But it was proper, like muse had been. There was a relation to medium there. The entity hadn't provided a sign this time, but she was working out her own. Between the ears and the tails, massive new tools for emoting and emphasis, and medium that could add variations of light and color and even size, new horizons of expression were opening. The very way she approached communication was changing moment by moment. Malachite looked down at herself, clad in black fur with green highlights, a pair of luxurious tails swishing at her back, wrapped in a jacket she hadn't seen in 6 years, standing before some nightmare visage that spoke her language more than the vast majority of people she'd ever seen in her life. By all rights, she had every reason to feel displaced and terrified. But she didn't. If anything, she was worried she was going to wake up. She put her hands in the jacket pockets and looked up at the creature. Her eyes were solid green now, like marbles in their sockets, though she wasn't yet aware of it. Tell me more, she signed, with her medium rather than her hands. Around her head, a halo of bright green fluid mimicked the motions required in abstract but recognizable shapes, too bright and large to be ignored, loud without sound. The thing understood. Instruments make up the last part of the, character creation section of Gallery, although, much like manifestation, it's not a thing that you decide on when you first begin the game. This is something that you get a little bit further on, probably about 3 sessions, as the game kind of lays out its timeline. You can obviously spend a lot longer on this process if you want to. If you kind of want to spend more time in what we call the prelude section, this can come later on. But when you gain your manifestation, when you gain that kind of vision of self that we talk about in the previous chapter to this one, and you slip to Gallery and you encounter a patron for the first time, they give you this, which is an instrument, which is kind of a tool. It can be a new object that you haven't encountered and just happen to have some kind of affection for, or it can be an object that has some connection to your past that you maybe revealed to the guide or showed up in your kind of prelude story. But unlike some of the other unique tools that kind of come with the trappings of a muse, one of which is called a way wand, which we'll talk about a little bit later, this one is actually a genuinely powerful magical artifact of some sort. The patrons have crafted this or enhanced this or elevated this in a way that grants it certain unique powers when it's in your hand, and or on your person, as the case may be. The instrument serves a variety of different purposes in the game. It's another way to customize your character. It grows with your character in the same way that the other 2 sections of the game grow with your character, so your motif and your manifestation. This also levels up as you go on. It's another thing that has 2 tiers of selection. There is a broader category, tools, jewelry, and accessories, and comfort objects. And then within each of those, there are 3 more categories, much the same way that the motif and manifestation had worked. There are within tools, measuring devices, reference material, or tool, just general tool. Within jewelry, there's circlet, chains and badges, and piercings. And within comfort items, there are toys, garments, and trinkets. And most objects that you can think of are going to fall into more than one category here. So you have the object that you select by virtue of your story, and then you and the guide can have some conversation about where exactly you want it to land. If I'm given a bracelet that belonged to a character that my character really loved or something who died some time ago, that is probably a piece of jewelry. But is it a circlet or is it a chain and a badge? Probably a circlet, but I could probably make an argument for a chain depending on the shape of it. And depending on which of these power sets that I want to have for the assistance of my character, I think either one of them would be appropriate. And the idea here is not to get into an argument with your guide, but rather to have some variety in case two people end up with the same object, or in case there's just a specific power set that you would like to have to fit the aesthetic of your individual instrument choice. So between having the 6 motif options and 3 manifestation options for each motif, and then 3 additional options for instruments, and then 3 additional options within each of those instrument categories, that is the breadth of character creation options within Gallery, not including different avenues for growth. So what looks to be on surface level a rather kind of constrained amount of choices ends up being quite a huge set of permutations for creating individual characters that will all have different powers. And then there's additional stuff beyond this too that just had to do with what abilities you'll get as you go, or what items you get, or things like that. None of which are intended to make you read lists. The whole process of selecting an instrument, if you want to read all the different power sets, you certainly can. But the way that this is structured is such that the choice should be pretty organic based on your story. There will probably be some kind of artifact or some kind of trapping or some kind of thing that your character is just attracted to, that the patron, with their ability to kind of see in and out of different realities, mind read, etc., can pull something to kind of that appeals to you and give it to you. And that will just come with a power set that is selected right out of here without you having to kind of pre-read anything. You just sort of pick the thing that's the most appropriate. The story that goes along with this particular chapter points out a few things that are kind of important to the setting. One has to do with the way that language is approached and the way that kind of translation magic is handled. You can come from any point in time in history, of any walk of life, and of any country when you're playing in Gallery. So you're going to have a situation where a lot of different characters are speaking different languages. Some of these languages may be linguistically compatible and just diverged by a few years. We have a character in a test game right now that's from New York in what's called the Wet Line, which is the modern time, and another character from New York in 1920, still speaking the same language, just with different dialectic or different slang and different general phrasing, but they get along fine. And then we have another character in that same party who's from 950 AD France, and magic has to be used in the form of brushwork, actually in the form of gastromancy, which we'll get to later, to allow these characters to communicate with each other. But rather than just kind of treating that as this is a generic translation, one of the things that's emphasized in Gallery is that there is sort of a difference between understanding each other and just kind of converting everything into some form of English or some form of native language that you're using, depending on where you're playing this game. And that actually understanding it is a bit of a different process. And it doesn't really kind of just turn into the kind of Star Trekian idea of we all just kind of speak the same thing now. It's more that you will gain new insight into the way that other people communicate. We want to kind of emphasize more of a learning thing than a reducing everybody to what you already know thing. So the idea behind the story was to just highlight a linguistic set that was physical as opposed to verbal, so that we could see that she wasn't magicked into suddenly speaking, but rather was given something that allows her to express even further using the language that she already knows and has always expressed with. Another thing that's brought up in this particular section, this is one of the more, I would say, positive depictions of one of the patrons communicating with a muse. Patrons are designed to be a little bit of a risk when they're spoken to. These are things that can seem very benevolent. These are things that can seem very much like they're on your side, like they care for you, like they know a lot about you and know what you want to hear. And in many cases will actually be genuinely helpful, like in the case of this, where they provide you one of the most valuable tools you'll get in the game. But it is sort of important to keep in mind, and these are things that muses in the setting will tell you as it's expounded in this object, that ultimately patrons like you because you do things for them. They like you because you are an element to their plan. And their gift to you here is within a very narrow set of guidelines of things that they are allowed to give that they have agreed on with each other in order to essentially bribe you, to gain your favor, to make you more willing to do the things that they ask or more willing to act on their behalf. Patrons are not specifically allowed to force you to do things, but they can certainly make it so that you might be more inclined to act in their favor. And they will try to do that. And this is one of the ways that they do that here. So we will have examples a little further on in the book with people who have much more kind of negative relationships with the patrons because of things that have gone on in their past and other stuff that the patrons have done. And then we have a character here who has a largely positive relationship with them. And it's different per person, and that is a thing to actually play with within the game, is because all of the characters will encounter these creatures at one point or another, and how they all kind of do it and deal with it is one of the ways that you can kind of play with it. The last thing that this story kind of highlights is one of many ways that you can use Medium to express, and emphasizes that Medium is a tool to be kind of used as you narrate your character. This is not just a thing that is sort of like the magic that is used in spells. This is a form of personal expression that you have utter control over. And when we get to the Medium chapter and the brushwork chapter, it will explain a little bit more of the unique things that it can do at any given point. But Medium is not a thing that really disappears when you use it. There are ways that it gets expunged if you get frustrated, if you fail at things, if you find yourself in situations where you're sort of mentally drained, you can lose it. And if you use it to twist, which is a way of manipulating dice rolls, it gets used up as well because that's kind of a frantic in the moment situation. But when you are creating with it, when you are expressing with it, it doesn't really go away. If anything, you get more of it back. So you are encouraged to do the things that are sort of expressed here. Malachite, for instance, is not using up a resource by communicating with Medium. If anything, she's getting more of it because she's able to speak in a way that is further emphasized. And the same thing happens with anybody else who's kind of using it to actively paint with, to create with, or to emphasize work with. Is this just becomes kind of a third element to your character that allows them to express even further than they could before.